Inside U.S. prisons, how gang power really works. They had 6 minutes before the tier exploded. No alarms. No sirens. Just the sound of metal doors locking one by one. Someone had already decided who would be trapped inside. Stay with this story. What happens next almost didn't get stopped. Officer Daniel Reyes stood at the control desk, eyes fixed on the monitor labeled C Block East. The feed flickered, then froze. He tapped the screen once. Nothing. Across the tier, inmates were supposed to be locked down for count. Instead, men were still moving. Too many of them. Reyes felt it before he understood it. Something was wrong. A radio crackled behind him. Static. Then silence. He checked the clock. 6 minutes until full lockdown. The prison ran on timing. Miss it, and control shifted to the inmates. Reyes leaned forward, scanning names on the movement log. 3 releases that shouldn't exist. 2 doors opened without authorization. And 1 inmate who wasn't supposed to be there at all. The name sat on the screen longer than it should have. Marcus Hale. Reyes swallowed. Hale was a quiet one. No write-ups. No fights. No noise. But for weeks, Hale had been submitting request slips. Not complaints. Warnings. Patterns forming in C block. 1 slip read. Not random movement. Someone coordinating. The slips had been logged. Ignored. Reyes had read them late at night, long after his shift ended. They didn't sound like paranoia. They sounded like math. Every warning pointed to the same window of time. The same rotation of officers. The same blind spots in camera coverage. And always the same sentence at the end. This isn't about beef. It's about control. Reyes brought it up during briefing once. The room went quiet. Then a lieutenant laughed. Inmates see ghosts everywhere, he said. Especially the smart ones. That was the end of it. Until now. The camera feed snapped back on. What it showed made Reyes stand up too fast. Inmates weren't fighting. They weren't yelling. They were positioning. 3 stood near the stairwell. 2 blocked the phones. 1 lingered by the emergency door, pretending to stretch. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography. Reyes grabbed his radio. Control to Sergeant Wilkes. I need eyes on C Block East. Now. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. Down the corridor, the sound of boots echoed. Too slow. Backup wasn't close enough. Reyes checked the door controls. Someone had overridden manual lockout. That required clearance. Or help. He pulled up the staffing roster. 1 officer assigned to the tier tonight shouldn't have been on duty. Officer Grant Miller. Transferred in last month. Clean record. No flags. Except for one thing. Miller had approved every denied request Hale ever filed. Every warning slip had passed through his terminal. Reyes felt the weight of that detail settle in his chest. The clock ticked down. For minutes. On the monitor, Hale appeared at the far end of the tier. Hands at his sides. Not moving. He looked directly at the camera. Not pleading. Waiting. Reyes zoomed in. Hale's lips moved barely. Now. The emergency door at the end of the tier clicked open. That door was never unlocked during count. Never. A group stepped through, not rushing, not hiding. Just walking. They wore no colors. No visible tattoos. That was the point. Reyes had seen gang violence before. This wasn't that. This was something cleaner. Quieter. The radio crackled again. This time, a whisper. Reyes, a voice said. Don't escalate. It was Miller. Reyes turned, scanning the control room. Miller wasn't there. Where are you? Reyes asked. The pause. Where I'm supposed to be. On the monitor, Miller appeared at the top of the stairwell inside C block. He was holding the door open. Reyes felt cold. You need to lock that door, Reyes said. Now. Miller shook his head. They already run this place, he said calmly. I'm just not pretending anymore. The inmates moved. Not fast. Not violent. They surrounded Hale. Reyes expected fists. Something brutal. Instead, they stopped a step away. Hale spoke. No one else did. You were warned, Hale said. Schedules. blind spots. Miller watched from above, hands resting on the railing. Reyes slammed the override switch. Nothing happened. Someone had disabled it. 2 minutes. Reyes realized the truth too late. This wasn't a riot. It wasn't retaliation. It was a test. The inmates weren't trying to escape. They were proving they didn't need to. Control was already theirs. Hale turned his head slightly, eyes still on the camera. "This ends when you see it," he said. The feed cut. Alarms finally screamed to life. Boots thundered down the hall. By the time backup reached C Block East, the tier was silent. Too silent. No injuries. No weapons. No obvious damage. Miller was gone. So was Hale. At first, officials called it a system glitch. A staffing error. A misunderstanding. Until Reyes requested the access logs. And saw something impossible. Every door, every camera shift, every override had been authorized. From inside the system. But when they checked the logs, everything changed. By morning, the official report was already finished. Temporary system malfunction. No credible threat. Inmate miscount resolved. The words were neat, reassuring, final. Officer Reyes read it twice, then folded it without signing. Because the logs told a different story. Every door that opened had a valid authorization code. Every camera that went dark had been manually cycled. Every override came from a terminal inside the prison. Not hacked. Not forced. Approved. Reyes requested a full audit. The request was denied within the hour. Instead, he was told to take 2 days off. Fatigue affects perception, the deputy warden said. You saw what you expected to see. That was the mistake. Because prisons don't run on chaos. They run on routine. And routines leave trails. Reyes spent his forced leave doing what the system wouldn't. He mapped movement patterns from memory. Who cleaned which tier? Who worked which shifts? Who never seemed to get searched? Every line crossed back to the same place. C Block East. And the same missing piece. Marcus Hale. Hale hadn't escaped. That would have triggered every alarm in the state. Instead, his file now read administrative transfer pending. No destination. No paperwork. No timestamp. In 20 years, Reyes had never seen that field left blank. When he returned to duty, the tone had shifted. Cameras were upgraded overnight. Extra staff appeared on paper but not on tiers. Certain inmates were moved without explanation. Others weren't. Reyes noticed the silence first. In C Block East, conversations stopped when officers approached. Not fear. Calculation. Inmates weren't tense. They were confident. One afternoon, an inmate slipped Reyes a note during laundry exchange. No threats. No demands. Just a number. 1740. Reyes checked the time. 5:40 p.m. Shift change. The busiest, messiest moment of the day. That evening, Reyes positioned himself near the control desk. He watched officers rotate. Watched doors cycle. At exactly 1740, 3 cameras blinked off. Different tiers. Same duration. 30 seconds. Too short for maintenance. Too precise for error. When the feeds returned, nothing appeared wrong. Except one inmate was gone. Not missing from count. Missing from records. His name vanished between updates. As if he'd never existed. Reyes raised the issue. Internal Affairs showed up the next morning. Not to investigate the disappearance. To investigate Reyes. They asked about stress. Judgment. They suggested counseling. And quietly reassigned him away from C Block East. That was mistake number 2. Because once patterns are seen, they don't unsee themselves. The disappearances continued. Not every day. Not predictably. One kitchen worker. One porter. One inmate scheduled for release in 3 weeks. Always after a camera gap. Always during routine transitions. Always clean. Reyes found an old incident report buried in archives. 5 years earlier. Different prison. Same method. The report had been closed with one line circled in red. No gang indicators present. The investigator who wrote it had resigned months later. Reyes tracked him down. The man refused to meet. But he sent one message. They don't wear colors. They don't fight. They don't rush. They replace. Reyes understood then. This wasn't gang power as everyone imagined it. No tattoos. No riots. This was infrastructure. Inmates filling roles. Creating dependencies. Removing friction. If someone caused trouble, they disappeared. Quietly. No violence needed. The prison adapted around them. By the time administration noticed anomalies, the system already relied on them. Reyes took his findings to the deputy warden. She listened. Didn't interrupt. Then she closed the folder. "You're chasing ghosts," she said. "And you're risking your career." That night, Reyes received a message on his personal phone. A known number. "You're asking the wrong questions," it read. "Focus on who benefits." Minutes later, his access badge stopped working. The next day, Officer Grant Miller's name was removed from the staffing database. No termination record. No transfer. Just gone. Reyes checked the surveillance archive from the night Miller vanished. The footage existed, but every frame showed empty hallways. Too empty. Reyes realized the final truth too late. This wasn't about hiding crimes. It was about proving they could erase people without resistance. And the system was helping them do it. Reyes prepared to file an external report. Before he could, he was called into the warden's office. A single file sat on the desk. His name was on it. Inside was a transfer order. Immediate. Out of state. No appeal. As Reyes stood to leave, the warden spoke without looking up. "You were right about one thing," she said. "They're organized." Reyes paused. "And the rest?" he asked. She finally met his eyes. "They're watching who notices." When Reyes stepped outside, his phone buzzed again. One final message. 17:40 tomorrow. This time, there was no sender. And no mistake left to make. At 17:38, the prison looked normal. Count sheets clipped. Doors cycling. Radios murmuring routine codes. Reyes stood in the parking lot across the street, watching the clock on his phone tick down. He wasn't supposed to be there. His transfer paperwork was active. His badge was dead. His authority was gone. But his access to one thing remained. The external maintenance network. 2 years earlier, a contractor had shown him a shortcut during a power outage. A forgotten diagnostic portal. Read-only access. No alarms. No logs. At 17:39, Reyes logged in. The system loaded slowly. Too slowly. Inside the prison, the pattern began again. 3 cameras blinked out. Different blocks. Different purposes. Kitchen. Laundry. Medical intake. 30 seconds. Reyes didn't watch the video feeds. He watched the permissions table. New user sessions appeared. Not staff IDs. Not inmate numbers. Role-based access tokens. Temporary. Rotating. Self-deleting. The prison wasn't being infiltrated. It was being used. At 17:40, one new token remained active longer than the rest. Label, facility support. That role didn't exist. Reyes traced it backward. The origin wasn't a terminal. It was a process. A background service added 6 months earlier during a routine software update. Approved. Signed off. Never reviewed again. The realization landed hard. This wasn't corruption in the usual sense. No bribes. No threats. It was cooperation without awareness. The system had been taught to trust a function it didn't understand. And inmates like Marcus Hale had noticed. Hale hadn't been a leader. He'd been an analyst, identifying leverage points, teaching others how to blend into operations. Which jobs mattered, which movements triggered audits, which roles gave access without scrutiny. They didn't need to fight guards. They needed to become necessary. The disappearances weren't executions. They were removals. Inmates who resisted the structure, who disrupted efficiency, who couldn't be integrated. They were reassigned through phantom transfers, hidden inside administrative noise. No body, no incident, just absence. At 17:41, the final camera feed returned. Inside the medical intake room, nothing appeared wrong. Except one gurney was missing. and one nurse stood frozen, staring at an empty doorway. Reyes disconnected. Within minutes, sirens reached the street. This time, the response was real. External agencies arrived. Servers were seized. Audits began. The official findings would later describe it as a convergence of procedural oversights. That phrase buried the truth, because the truth was simpler. The prison had measured success by calm. No riots, no violence, no headlines. And the inmates who understood that had used it. Marcus Hale was never found. Investigators concluded he had orchestrated the system, then removed himself once it ran without him. A self-sustaining structure. Power without presence. Officer Grant Miller was discovered months later in another state, working under a different name. He claimed he'd only smoothed operations. Made things quieter. No jury ever heard the full story. Too much of it depended on admitting how easily control had been shared. Reyes completed his transfer. He never worked inside a prison again. But years later, during a consulting job, he saw the same software module flagged for rollout in another facility. Same background service. Same permissions logic. Different state. Different inmates. The system hadn't learned. It had optimized. This could happen again. If this story shook you, the next one will be worse.